The cold wind howled through the empty church, rattling the stained glass windows as the sun dipped behind the horizon. Dust particles danced in the fading light, settling on the old wooden pews. Among the forgotten memories and whispers of prayers, a lone figure knelt, hand trembling as it brushed against the crumbling plaster of the wall. There, hidden behind layers of time, was a fragment, torn orders, yellowed and frayed, etched with ink that had long since begun to fade.
Sergeant James McAllister, the name barely legible, stood out amidst the chaos of scribbled directives. A relic from 1944, it spoke of a deployment from Fort Bragg, a place alive with camaraderie and the bustle of military life. But the orders didn't just reveal logistics. They hinted at a mission shrouded in secrecy, a purpose lost to the ravages of war. What once brought pride now taunted with mystery.
McAllister had vanished without a trace after this final deployment, swallowed by the shadows of history. In the quiet of the church, the air thickened with urgency. The question gnawed at the edges of thought. What happened to my grandfather? The fragile paper crumpled in her grasp as Emily, his granddaughter, felt the weight of generations upon her shoulders. It was a legacy not just of blood, but of unanswered questions and haunting silences. What lay beneath the surface of those orders? Were they the key to unveiling a long-buried truth, or merely a ghost of a life interrupted? The past felt alive in that moment, a whisper urging her to dig deeper. The orders, a tangible connection to the man she had only known through sepia-toned photographs, promised revelations that could bridge the chasm of time. They were not just pieces of paper. They pulsed with the echoes of a life lived amidst chaos and fear. Each word, each smudge of ink, seemed to push her forward, urging her to confront the enigma left in her grandfather's wake. As she studied the notes, the flickering light cast eerie shadows, painting the walls with a tapestry of doubt and intrigue. Who was Sergeant McAllister really? A hero? A victim? Or perhaps a pawn in a game far larger than himself? The questions spiraled, weaving an intricate web of curiosity and determination. With every heartbeat, the urgency increased. The church, once a sanctuary, now transformed into a crucible of discovery. The torn orders might hold the key, a breadcrumb leading to the truth of a man lost to history. Emily felt the pulse of adventure quicken within her. She was on the brink of unveiling a story that had waited for decades to be told. Outside, the wind howled louder, but inside, an electric silence enveloped her, a sign that the journey ahead could finally bring closure to a family haunted by a disappearance. The truth was out there, and she would find it. The threads of fate had intertwined, and Emily was ready to pull at them. As the last rays of sunlight slipped away, the figure kneeling before the wall remained oblivious to the encroaching darkness. Sarah McAllister, a woman in her late 20s, felt a strange pull to this abandoned church just outside Fayetteville, North Carolina. Her grandfather, Sergeant James McAllister, had vanished nearly 80 years ago, right after his final deployment from Fort Bragg in 1944. The weight of his absence settled heavily on her shoulders, a silent burden she had carried through her youth and into adulthood. Growing up, Sarah had only heard fragmented stories about her grandfather. Her grandmother, still alive but frail, spoke of him in hushed tones, her eyes glimmering with sadness each time his name was mentioned. He was a man of courage, someone who had faced the horrors of war but had never returned home. Photos of a handsome young soldier in crisp uniform adorned the walls of her childhood home, yet the warmth of those images was overshadowed by the cool shadow of his disappearance. In the McAllister family, James was a hero, a man who had served his country with pride. Yet, like so many others, he had become a ghost, fading into the fabric of history. It was this sense of unfulfilled legacy that drove Sarah to track down every piece of information, every whisper of memory surrounding his fate. She had pored over archives, scoured military records, and talked to veterans who might have known him. But the truth had remained elusive. After her grandmother's recent passing, Sarah found herself at a crossroads. The weight of unresolved questions gnawed at her, propelling her to search deeper into her family's history. She was not just seeking answers for herself. She wanted to know who James McAllister truly was, beneath the layers of heroism and loss. The torn orders she now held were a new lead, a glimmer of hope in a darkened landscape of uncertainty. As her fingers traced the faded letters on the fragment, Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. The history of her family was not just a series of disjointed tales. It was a living tapestry woven with love, sacrifice, and heartache. She pictured her grandfather, a young man barely out of his teens, facing the unknown with resolve. What had happened to him? Where had he gone after those orders had been issued? Each question sparked a fire of determination within her. Sarah's heart was heavy with a mix of fear and anticipation. The chill of the church seemed to seep into her bones as she reflected on the weathered building surrounding her. It had stood as a witness to countless stories, joyful, sorrowful, and mysterious. She could almost hear the prayers that had echoed through its walls, the hopes and dreams whispered to the heavens. Now it served as a sanctuary for lost hope, just like her own family. The church was a refuge for those seeking solace, and she felt a kinship with its hidden secrets. Determined not to let her grandfather's memory fade like the ink on the orders, Sarah stood up and surveyed the interior. Dust motes hung in the air, catching the fading light, creating a surreal atmosphere. Each creak of the floorboards seemed to resonate with the echoes of the past. She could imagine soldiers in the pews, drawing strength from their faith before heading off to battle. She felt a flicker of connection with them. Her grandfather was part of that lineage, that bond forged in the fires of war. With renewed resolve, Sarah took a deep breath and left the church, the torn orders safely tucked away in her pocket. She could almost hear her grandfather's voice urging her to keep searching, to uncover the truth that had eluded their family for so long. The winds of change whispered in her ears, beckoning her to follow the trail of history and to honor the man who had once been her hero. As she stepped out into the crisp night air, the stars began to twinkle overhead, a celestial map guiding her toward answers yet to be discovered. Each one represented a story, a life, and perhaps, just perhaps, a piece of her grandfather's legacy waiting to be found. She was ready to uncover the mystery of Sergeant James McAllister, and this time, she would not rest until she had brought his story into the light. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the dilapidated pews of the old church. Dust danced in the fading light, swirling around Sarah McAllister as she knelt before the crumbling wall. The church had been abandoned for decades, its walls whispering forgotten prayers and untold stories. Yet today, it was alive with a strange energy, an echo of the past that drew her into its depths. In her mind, she could picture her grandfather, Sergeant James McAllister, a sturdy figure clad in olive drab, standing proud in his uniform as he prepared for his final deployment from Fort Bragg in 1944. He was a man of principles, a protector, driven by duty and honor. But those virtues did little to ease the pain of his disappearance. He vanished without a trace, leaving behind a family fractured by unanswered questions and a legacy shrouded in mystery. As she ran her fingers along the rough surface of the wall, Sarah felt a sudden chill, as if the very bricks held the weight of her grandfather's fate. Stories told to her in childhood by her grandmother, hushed, reverent tales of a brave soldier, were now overshadowed by an unsettling sense of loss. Where had he gone? Why was there no body, no closure? The echoes of his laughter and stories lingered in her memory, yet the details were like grains of sand slipping through her fingers. The wall before her seemed different, almost alive, as if it recognized her anguish. Sarah had come to this church on a whim, drawn by the stories of locals who once spoke of hidden relics and forgotten histories buried within its confines. It was here, in the silence of this sacred place, that she hoped to find something, anything, that might connect her to the man who had been lost to time. Suddenly, her fingertips brushed against something textured and jagged. She leaned closer, squinting in the dim light to see a torn piece of paper wedged into a crack in the mortar. With trembling hands, she carefully pried it loose, cringing as the fragile paper resisted her touch. The moment she separated it from the wall, a rush of air swept through the church, carrying with it the scent of mildew and aged wood. It felt as if the building itself was exhaling, releasing a secret long-held captive. The paper was worn and faded, the ink barely visible. She held it up to the fading light, squinting to decipher the scrawled letters. It was a fragment of military orders, a document that once commanded attention, but now lay forgotten, hidden from view. The words were jagged, a testament to the chaos that had enveloped her grandfather's last days. As she read the few lines she could make out, a sense of urgency flooded her heart. Deployed to reconnaissance mission, contact station, immediate action required. Her mind raced. What had her grandfather been swept into? The orders spoke of urgency, suggesting a mission of great importance. This was unlike any other story she had heard. He hadn't simply disappeared. He had been sent into a situation that demanded immediate response. What had happened during that mission? Had it gone awry? She felt a knot tighten in her stomach as the implications settled in. The church around her seemed to pulse with the weight of history. The wooden beams overhead creaked and groaned, the chill of the evening seeping through the cracks. Was this where he had sought solace before departing? Had he prayed for guidance, for safety? Her heart ached for the man who had been reduced to whispers and faded photographs. She could almost see him kneeling here, wrestling with the gravity of the moment, feeling the heaviness of the world pressing down upon him. Sarah knew she couldn't keep this discovery to herself. The torn orders were more than a relic. They were a fragment of her grandfather's truth, a key that could unlock the mystery of his disappearance. She needed to learn more, to dive deeper into the shadowy corners of his life. She envisioned the conversations she would have, the questions she would ask, an investigation into the past that could finally bring her family some semblance of closure. As she stood, a flicker of determination ignited within her. The path ahead was uncertain, but she was no longer just a bystander in her family's history. With the torn orders clutched tightly in her hand, Sarah stepped away from the wall, the weight of her grandfather's story now intertwined with her own. The search for answers had begun. The crisp air of December 1944 was heavy with the anticipation of winter. Sarah had spent countless evenings combing through her grandfather's military records, newspaper clippings, and faded photographs, piecing together the fragments of a life that had seemingly vanished without a trace. Each document was a thread leading her deeper into the tapestry of his disappearance, yet with every new lead, the path grew tangled and complex. The initial investigation began shortly after her grandfather's deployment. Local military officials first reported his absence when he failed to return from an assignment in Europe. To Sarah, the days that followed felt like an eternity, filled with uncertainty and unanswered questions. Letters poured in from other families, some echoing her own despair, recounting similar stories of loved ones who had disappeared into the fog of war. The once tight-knit community around Fort Bragg was now burdened by the weight of loss, each house cloaked in grief. As Sarah sifted through her grandfather's belongings, she encountered the bureaucracy of the military. The red tape was suffocating. Forms filled with bureaucratic jargon repeatedly assured her that a full investigation was underway. The pain of her family's loss was compounded by the cold response she received from the officials. They spoke of probable casualty and missing in action, terms that felt devoid of the humanity they were meant to address. When she visited the military archives, she stumbled upon a file marked McAllister James, MIA. The contents were sparse. A few reports, a photograph of her grandfather's unit, and a single note that suggested a possible ambush in the Ardennes region. The mention of that place sent chills down her spine. It was where the Battle of the Bulge was raging, where men fought bravely against overwhelming odds. Yet the report gave no conclusive details about her grandfather's fate. Each lead Sarah pursued seemed to end in a brick wall. She spoke to surviving veterans who had served alongside him. Some remembered his laughter, his knack for lightening the mood even in the direst of circumstances. Others recounted the fateful mission that had taken them deep into enemy territory, a mission that had gone horribly wrong. They described the sounds of gunfire, the chaos of combat, and how men had been picked off, one by one. Yet, no one could pinpoint what had happened to Sergeant James McAllister that day. With each conversation, Sarah felt a weight settle in her chest, a blend of hope and despair. The stories were vivid but unreliable. Memories from the battlefield often morphed with the haze of war. The absence of definitive answers gnawed at her, leaving her feeling that she was grasping at shadows. In quiet moments, Sarah would close her eyes and imagine her grandfather's laugh, the way he would tell stories of the Great War over a crackling fire. She yearned to understand what had happened, to reclaim the narrative that war had violently torn apart. Her thoughts returned to the torn orders she had found in the church wall. Perhaps they held the key to finally understanding his fate. As she grew more determined, she decided to seek help from local historians, veterans organizations, and even amateur sleuths who had taken an interest in uncovering the stories of the forgotten. With each new inquiry, the mystery deepened. Some suggested he had been taken as a prisoner of war, while others whispered of darker fates. The ambiguity was maddening. Days turned into weeks, and the investigation began to feel like a personal crusade. Each encounter brought the promise of revelation, yet disappointment always lurked nearby. Sarah recorded her findings diligently, mapping out connections and timelines, while the specter of her grandfather's absence loomed larger than ever. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something crucial, a piece of the puzzle that would finally lead her to the truth. "Do you believe in the truth always coming to light?" a friend had asked during one of their discussions. Sarah hesitated, her gaze lost in thought. It was a question that echoed in her mind. The truth felt like a distant shore, obscured by fog, and every day that passed brought an unsettling mix of longing and uncertainty. As she returned to the church one last time, the air thick with anticipation, she whispered to herself, "I will find you, Grandpa. I promise." You believe that sometimes the truth can evade us, hidden in the shadows of time. Do you think Sarah will uncover what lies beneath the surface? Share your thoughts below before you discover what her search yields. As Sarah continued to kneel before the wall, each breath she took filled her with a sense of anticipation. The torn orders lay just out of reach, their frayed edges whispering secrets of the past. She could hardly believe that the long-lost documents had surfaced in such an unexpected place. Her heart raced as she recalled the family stories that surrounded her grandfather's disappearance. The mystery had haunted her family for generations, and now, with the discovery of these orders, she felt a profound sense of duty to uncover the truth. The church, its wooden beams creaking softly in the evening breeze, had stood as a silent witness to the passage of time. Once a place of worship, it now bore the scars of neglect, but there was a peculiar beauty in its decay. Sunlight poured through cracks in the roof, illuminating a small patch on the floor where dust motes floated like tiny stars against the shadows. Sarah reached for the orders, her fingertips brushing against the brittle paper. The contrast between her modern attire and the aged document was striking, a symbol of the chasm that separated her from the world her grandfather had known. With the help of a flashlight, she examined the orders more closely. The ink was faded but legible, revealing a series of handwritten notes that seemed to indicate a change in deployment plans. The paper smelled of mildew and history, a testament to the time it had spent hidden from view. The orders spoke of a mission set for late 1944, details of troop movements, locations, and strategic objectives. But what caught her attention most was a hastily scribbled note in the margins. "Meet at the rendezvous point before dusk. Trust no one." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. What did that mean? Did her grandfather suspect something was awry? This new information raised more questions than it answered, igniting her curiosity like wildfire. She couldn't shake the feeling that these orders were not just a routine deployment, but something more significant, perhaps even perilous. Her grandfather had been a soldier, yes, but he was also a man who had lived through the uncertainties of war, and now, it seemed, he had foreseen danger. The sunlight waned, plunging the church into a shadowy embrace. She felt a chill wash over her as she carefully tucked the orders into her bag. The air was thick with both anticipation and dread. Thoughts of her grandfather flooded her mind. The warmth of his smile, the stories he had told her about bravery and loyalty, about the camaraderie of soldiers. What had happened to him after he left Fort Bragg? What had led to his disappearance? Determined to find answers, Sarah made her way back to her car, the orders cradled protectively in her bag. The journey home felt surreal, each passing streetlight illuminating memories of her childhood and summers, spent listening to her grandfather's tales. She recalled the old photographs he had shown her, the men in uniform, the camaraderie, and the laughter that once filled the air. Yet, the laughter had been muted by the specter of loss that hung over their family. As she reached her driveway, she realized she needed help. This wasn't just about her. There were others who deserved to know the truth. Her first thought was to contact a local historian who had dedicated years to researching World War II, a man whose reputation for uncovering lost stories was unparalleled. Perhaps he could shed light on the mission referenced in the orders or help her connect with others who might have known her grandfather. Sitting at her desk later that night, Sarah meticulously transcribed the orders into her notebook, hoping to preserve every detail. As she wrote, she felt a connection to her grandfather, as if he was guiding her through the process. The room was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of paper and the soft ticking of a clock, marking the passage of time. The faint scent of old books wafted through the air, grounding her in the moment. She knew this was only the beginning, a journey into the past that would lead her to uncover not just her grandfather's fate, but perhaps an integral piece of history that had been buried for too long. With each stroke of her pen, she felt a growing resolve. The mystery had shifted. It was no longer just about a soldier's disappearance, but about illuminating the truth for all those who had been affected. As she closed her notebook, Sarah knew that she was no longer just a granddaughter seeking closure. She was a keeper of her grandfather's legacy, determined to unearth the secrets that lay hidden in the shadows of history. The torn orders lay before Sarah like a puzzle waiting to be assembled. As she carefully unfolded the fragile paper, each crease and tear whispered secrets of a time long past. The ink, faded yet legible, revealed a series of directives issued from Fort Bragg on a cold morning in late 1944. It detailed a deployment order for Sergeant James McAllister and his unit, the 82nd Airborne Division, for a mission that would change the course of their lives forever. The first line struck her: Operation Market Garden. The mission had been ambitious, a bold attempt to seize key bridges in the Netherlands and outflank German defenses. Yet, the historians had deemed it ultimately a failure. One more tragic example of how war rarely unfolded as planned. Sarah felt a chill as she recalled the stories whispered in her family about her grandfather's disappearance. He had been part of that ill-fated operation, and while history had moved on, her family had remained tethered to the unanswered questions surrounding his fate. As she read on, the orders specified the location, near a small village called Arnhem. The paper hinted at an aerial drop behind enemy lines, a maneuver that relied heavily on the element of surprise. It painted a vivid picture in her mind of paratroopers cascading from the sky, their chutes unfurling against a backdrop of gunfire and chaos. It was a moment she could almost visualize, yet it felt surreal to think of her grandfather amidst that very turbulence. The weight of the narrative pressed down on her chest, mingling with a strange sense of urgency. Amid the standard instructions, a hastily scrawled note caught her attention, a fragment of the urgent chaos that enveloped soldiers in combat. Beware of enemy stronghold. Reconnaissance suggests troop movements. Remain vigilant. The scrawl was shaky, possibly written moments before the orders were issued. It was a stark reminder that her grandfather had been more than just a soldier. He was a man acutely aware of the dangers that surrounded him, a protector amidst the storm. The church's decaying walls felt like they were closing in as she struggled to reconcile the calm she had always associated with her grandfather's image with the reality of his last mission. The orders revealed a world rife with peril, and in that moment, Sarah realized that the uncertainty her family had endured was not merely the absence of a loved one, but the weight of unprocessed grief, a burden passed down through generations. With every word she read, the pieces began to form a picture, one that was both haunting and illuminating. The orders concluded with a list of names, fellow soldiers, those who had fought alongside her grandfather that day. She recognized a few from old photographs, their youthful faces frozen in time, forever marked by the war. The weight of their shared experiences hung heavy in the air, and she could almost hear the echoes of camaraderie and fear that had punctuated their final moments together. Flipping the paper over, she discovered the back bore a hastily drawn map, marked with strategic points and notations in the same frantic handwriting. It detailed routes and landmarks, including a reference to the bridge in Arnhem, where her grandfather and his battalion had faced fierce resistance. A surge of emotion welled within her. This was not just a historical relic, it was a fragment of her grandfather's last attempt to grasp control of his fate. Suddenly, a realization struck her. The map alongside the orders seemed to indicate a specific route that led to a less-known area, perhaps an escape route for the soldiers. Could it be that her grandfather had survived the initial drop, but had encountered unforeseen challenges after landing? The thought ignited a flicker of hope within her, a hope that had been dimmed by decades of uncertainty. As she sat in the dim light of the church, the air thick with dust and memory, the pieces of her grandfather's story began to converge. This was not merely a record of deployment, it was a testament to the bravery, desperation, and humanity that defined those who served. The orders had survived the ravages of time and war, speaking to her from the depths of history. Sarah's heart raced as she considered the implications. What if her grandfather had lived? What if he had faked his own death, unable to return to a family bound by expectations and the horrors of war? Or was it simply a tragic misadventure lost to the chaos of battle? Beneath the weight of these possibilities lay a realization. The truth might be more complex, layered within the context of sacrifice, survival, and the unfathomable cost of war. The answers remained elusive, but one thing was certain. Her quest for truth had only just begun. As Sarah held the torn orders in her hands, a rush of emotions overwhelmed her. The crumpled paper, yellowed and fragile, carried not just the inked commands but the weight of her grandfather's life, abruptly interrupted in 1944. What began as a simple search for truth had transformed into a journey of rediscovery, reshaping not only her understanding of her grandfather's fate, but also restoring a semblance of closure to a family burdened by unanswered questions. A week after the discovery, Sarah organized a small gathering in the very church where the orders had been found. It felt fitting to celebrate her grandfather's legacy in a place steeped in history, where echoes of prayers and hymns still lingered in the air. Friends, family, and a few local historians came together to pay tribute to Sergeant James McAllister. As the sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, illuminating the faces of those present, Sarah felt a comforting presence. It was as if James himself was there, guiding her through this moment. The ceremony began with a brief presentation of the historical context surrounding Sergeant McAllister's deployment. A local historian explained how Fort Bragg served as a crucial base for troops heading to the European theater during the war. As she listened to the stories of bravery, sacrifice, and loss, Sarah was reminded of the resilience that defined her grandfather's generation. He had faced insurmountable odds, and yet he had aimed to serve with dignity and courage. Afterward, Sarah stood to speak, her heart pounding with a mix of anxiety and anticipation. Today, we gather not only to remember my grandfather, but to honor all the men and women who served during those harrowing times, she began, her voice steady yet filled with emotion. For years, our family has carried the weight of his disappearance, not knowing if he perished in combat or was forever lost in the shadows of the war. As she unfolded the story surrounding the found orders, including the details of his last mission, the room fell silent, each person hanging on to her every word. These orders were discovered in a wall of this very church, a place that has sheltered so many souls. They are a testament not just to my grandfather's service, but to the love and hope that we hold on to, even amidst the uncertainty. Tears glistened in the eyes of those present. The weight of shared histories hung thick in the air. Sarah continued, "My hope is that these orders will help us understand what happened to him. They may not provide all the answers, but they remind us of the importance of remembrance and the courage to keep searching for truth." As she concluded her speech, Sarah unveiled a framed photograph of her grandfather in uniform, standing tall against a backdrop of the American flag. It was a poignant reminder of the man he was, of the love he carried for his family, and of the sacrifices made in the name of freedom. She placed the photograph at the altar, a symbol of reverence, a promise to never let his memory fade. In the days that followed, Sarah and her family received an outpouring of support and stories from those who had also lost loved ones during the war. A local newspaper featured the story of Sergeant McAllister, igniting interest among veterans and historians alike. As the article circulated, new leads emerged regarding sightings of soldiers who had been with him during his final deployment. Each lead brought renewed hope to the McAllister family, rekindling a flame of determination that had long been buried beneath layers of grief. Months later, Sarah found herself poring over archives in the local library, surrounded by maps and military records. Each document felt like a piece of the puzzle falling into place. The quest for answers not only deepened her understanding of her grandfather's legacy, but also connected her to the broader narrative of those who fought and fell in the shadows of history. The search transformed from a personal endeavor into a communal effort, a reminder that the past is never truly buried, but rather waiting to be unearthed. As the anniversary of her grandfather's disappearance approached, Sarah felt a sense of peace she hadn't anticipated. While the mystery surrounding his fate remained unresolved, she had gained something far more profound. The journey had brought her family closer, uniting them in shared purpose and remembrance. Even if we never find out exactly what happened to him, Sarah reflected one evening standing in the church where it all began, we have reclaimed his story. He was more than just a soldier. He was a father, a husband, and a man of courage. And in that, he will never be forgotten. The faded orders lay before her, the paper fragile yet potent, a time capsule of fear and courage. Each tear, each smudge of ink, told a story that had remained buried for far too long. As Sarah traced the outlines of her grandfather's handwriting, a wave of emotions cascaded over her. The words felt like a conversation with the past, one that had been silenced by time, but was now ready to be heard. In that moment, she understood the weight of the legacy that had been handed down to her. Sergeant James McAllister had not simply vanished. He had become a part of the fabric of history, a thread woven into the tapestry of a tumultuous time, a soldier who had fought for freedom, a man who had left home with hope in his heart. The details from the orders confirmed what her family had long feared. He had been part of a mission that was never meant to succeed. As she got to her feet, dust motes swirling in the shaft of fading sunlight, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. The discovery of the orders was more than a puzzle piece. It was a call to action. She pictured her grandfather as he must have been, standing tall at Fort Bragg, surrounded by comrades, sharing laughter amidst the uncertainty. They were young men, full of dreams, unaware of the trials that awaited them overseas. For James, the mission had been an honor, a duty, but the cost had been steep. The church, though crumbling, served as a sanctuary for memories long forgotten. It echoed the prayers of families who had lost loved ones, a silent witness to the sacrifices made in the name of war. Sarah knew she had to honor that silence and the stories it held. In the weeks that followed, she contacted historians, local veterans groups, and even the church's congregation. Each conversation led to new revelations, each piece of information adding depth to her grandfather's story. Sarah began compiling what she had learned into a narrative that transcended mere facts. This was a journey of discovery, not just for her grandfather, but for every soldier whose name had been lost over time. The more she dug, the clearer it became that James's disappearance was a reflection of a larger tapestry of loss, bravery, and resilience. She felt compelled to share his story, to give voice to the silent echoes of the past. Months rolled on, and with each passing week, Sarah became more entwined with the legacy of her grandfather. She organized a community event at the very church where the orders had been found, an evening dedicated to honoring the sacrifices of veterans in the area. Flyers were distributed, veterans' tales were shared, and the church, once desolate, buzzed with life once more. On the night of the event, the church was transformed. Flickering candles lined the pews, illuminating photographs of local heroes hung on the walls, and the air was thick with a sense of shared history, grief, and pride. As Sarah stood at the pulpit, her heart raced. She felt her grandfather's presence, urging her on. She recounted his story, the bravery, and the ultimate sacrifice made in the face of overwhelming odds. As she spoke, she could see the audience drawn in, their eyes reflecting both the pain of loss and the hope of remembrance. It was a cathartic moment, one that rippled through the crowd, igniting conversations about duty, honor, and the stories that needed to be told. By the end of the evening, Sarah knew she had not only honored her grandfather, but had also helped others reclaim their histories. In the days that followed, the impact of that night lingered. Sarah received letters, stories, and photographs from families who had faced similar losses, all resonating with her grandfather's tale. As she looked back at the church, where it all began, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. The torn orders had served as a bridge, connecting the past with the present, reminding everyone that while some stories may fade, they can be rekindled through remembrance and respect. If stories from the past resonate with you, and you believe in the power of honoring memories, like and share this journey so that more lives touched by history may be remembered. Let us ensure that these echoes of bravery never fade into silence again.